Hey guys, welcome back to LastWordOnSports.com's official YouTube channel. This week, very interesting article I wrote on the my list of the top 10 athletes who never won a championship. I know there are other lists out there on the internet. I wanted to make one specifically to suit my needs. I didn't include players that were much before my time, so anything before the 1980s I did not include. And I didn't include any current athletes, so LeBron James would definitely not make my list because he's still seeking that championship and he may one day get it. So yeah, let's just jump right into the list. Feel free at the end to add your own players that maybe I forgot and make your list. Feel free to make a comment on and add those. So at number 10, Sir Charles Barkley. Barkley's image has been tarnished as of late as people seem to be waiting for the next ridiculous thing to come out of his mouth. But really that's not much different than during his playing career. Barkley was the quintessential bad boy, along with Dennis Rodman of the NBA. He was raw, nasty, in your face. During his playing career, he has many accomplishments, actually. Barkley was honored by playing in 11 All-Star games. He's one of only 4 players to retire with 20,000 points, 10,000 rebounds, 4,000 assists. He was named to the 50 greatest NBA players in history list. But unfortunately for him, during his playing career with the Sixers, Suns, and Rockets, he never won a championship. Like fellow basketballer Patrick Ewing, Barkley's career is tarnished by controversy. In 1991, he mistakenly spat on a girl. I guess there was some racial slurs made toward him, and I guess he got the wrong person. But nonetheless, he was an excellent player, and I definitely could not exclude him from my list. That leads me into number 2, the aforementioned Patrick Ewing. Was one of a few personalities that really carried the game through the 80s and 90s. A dominant rebounder, blocker. Ewing holds more records in those categories than can even be mentioned here. For instance, he holds a record for most games with consecutive block shots. I had to look this one up because it just seemed a little bit too incredible, but it's true. He blocked shots in 145 straight games. The Knicks were a good team because of him, but certainly he didn't have the supporting cast that some of the other star players in the 80s and 90s had, which put them over the edge and got them championships. He also had the uphill climb of battling teams in the East like Chicago, Boston, Indiana, and Miami, which knocked them out of the playoffs a few straight years. Ewing failed to win an NBA championship. Unfortunately, the later part of his career was marked by injuries, and I think he hung around a little bit too long, maybe a couple of years too late. But anyway, he also had his legacy damaged by that infamous sex club scandal in 2001. But certainly that doesn't take him away from my list of the top 10 players who never won a championship. At number 8, the Leafs fans might not like to be reminded of how long it's been since they won the Stanley Cup, but it is important to note that during their drought there have been many excellent players, and perhaps none more important than Matt Sundin. Now, honorable mention obviously goes to Daryl Sittler, but as I said, I'm not including him in this list because he was before my time. I'm not a Leafs fan, but I do respect a player of Sundin's quality and commitment to the organization. He never won a cup. He never got a sniff. In fact, he did make a conference final, but losing out to Los Angeles. But Matt Sundin was certainly an excellent player during his career. He's the longest-serving non-Canadian or American of any captain of any NHL team in history. He finished with 70 points in every single year he was with the Leafs, a minimum of 70 points, and he was the top Leaf scorer every year with the exception of one where Alexander McGillney beat him by, I think, like 7 or 8 points or something like that. So definitely Matt Sundin is worthy of making my list and sits at number 8. The first NFL player, the honor of the only player to play in both the NFL and CFL and make the Professional Football Hall of Fame, none other than Warren Moon. A legend in the Canadian game for his outstanding run of Grey Cups in the late 70s and 80s. And Moon took his game south of the border where he played for Houston, Minnesota, Seattle, Kansas City. Until very recently, Moon had the career record for passing yardage, which has since been surpassed by a few different NFL players, including Brett Favre, as well as Damon Allen and Anthony Calvillo of the CFL. He was also career touchdown pass leader and completion leader, which has also been surpassed by Brett Favre. Combined with the CFL and NFL, he has 70,553 yards, 435 touchdowns, so that's obviously an incredible feat. The CFL and NFL legend, however, never got a sniff at the Super Bowl, falling short each time without a legitimate supporting cast. I think during a few of his years, he did have Anthony Carter in Minnesota and some other players, but obviously it takes more than just a quarterback and a receiver to make a team. The closest he came was in 1991 season when the Buffalo Bills came back from a 35-3 lead against Houston in what would become known as the comeback. So that was the closest he got. Brings us to number 6. Speaking of the Buffalo Bills, I almost don't need to write anything for you to really understand where I'm coming from, where I say Jim Kelly makes my list at number 6. He's on the list because, for a few different reasons. He engineered 4 straight Super Bowls. That alone is very worthy of it. He was also someone who had to manage, as quarterback, he has to manage a lot of egos on that team. Those Bills teams of the early 90s had a lot of strong players, strong personalities. Andre Reed, Thurman Thomas, list goes on. So he was obviously a very important player in the NFL, and he's definitely worthy of making this list. Unfortunately for him, he became kind of a punchline of players who kind of almost got there, which I guess makes him more worthy of being on my list. But during his illustrious career, Kelly was a gifted passer with a knack for understanding how to distribute the ball. Unfortunately, it wasn't during any of the Super Bowls. Number 5, the final 5 of my list, starts with Karl the Mailman Malone. In his years in the NBA, Malone was joined at the hip with teammate John Stockton, who, by the way, makes my honorable mention list. In his 18 years in the league, he spent 17 with Utah before attempting to win that elusive championship with the Lakers. His 36,298 points is good for the second greatest total in history. Added to that, he ranks first in defensive rebounds in history, free throws attempted, and free throws made. Regarded as one of the game's most dominant power forwards in history, Malone won the league MVP in 1997 and 1999. Having appeared in the NBA Finals twice, once with Utah and once with Lakers, the trophy eluded him. Nonetheless, Karl Malone cannot miss anybody's top 10 list of players without a championship. Number 4, perhaps my favorite baseball player growing up, Ken Griffey Jr., or just Jr. He tops my list of Major League Baseball players who never won a championship during my time. There are certainly other worthy baseball players like Tony Gwynn and a couple others, but for me, during the 1990s, no player dominated hitting categories like Junior. He's 5th on the list for career home runs and is tied for the record for the most consecutive games with a home run at 8. This longtime Mariner played for the Reds and White Sox also. He was known for his power as much as he was for his defense, appearing in 13 All-Star games and winning an incredible 10 Gold Gloves. A lifetime 300 hitter, 297 actually, but Kenny led in most hitting categories for much of the 90s and was easily the best player in baseball during his prime. His widespread appeal only helped Major League Baseball's image, especially during those lockout years. So certainly, throughout his career, he never thrived outside of Seattle, but this long-term Mariner definitely makes my list and sits at number 4. The top hockey player to never win a Stanley Cup goes to Marcel Dionne. Unfortunately for my Red Wings at the time, they didn't realize what he would turn out to be. He was drafted 2nd, which is obviously a pretty high draft choice, but nonetheless, Marcel Dionne certainly thrived for the pre-Gretzky era Los Angeles Kings. During his career, he amassed over 1,700 points. He had 8 100-point seasons and 5 straight 50-goal seasons. However, being isolated again in Los Angeles without a supporting cast, he just didn't have the team to complement him and take him to the Stanley Cup. The last two, we're at number 2 and number 1, and I had to go back and forth which of these two I would put at 2 and 1. Both at NFL players, and I kind of thought I would put Dan Marino at number 2. Very close, number 2. One of the greatest pure passers the game has ever seen. Marino to Duper and Marino to Clayton became just part of NFL vocabulary for much of the late 80s and 90s. There is no shortage of reasons why this legend did not win the big one. But in his career, with the Dolphins, he amassed 61,361 yards, 420 touchdowns, only 252 picks, and had a career quarterback rating of 86.4. In 1984, he quarterbacked perhaps the greatest season ever by any quarterback in any league, where he threw for over 5,000 yards and 48 touchdowns. I had to double check that stat too. That seemed kind of high to me, but 48 touchdowns, which was, I think, around 12 more than the next closest person, something like that. But unfortunately for Marino, he did not win a Super Bowl. So a lot of people actually have got back to me from my article that they would put him at number 1. Completely understand. But for me, the number 1 player that I've ever seen play that did not win was Barry Sanders. Easily, Barry was the best rusher I've ever seen. To put it in perspective, I have been watching professional football for a long time. Throughout the 80s and 90s, I was glued to the TV. I saw Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, Eric Dickerson, list goes on. And for me, Barry Sanders, with the lack of supporting cast that he had to work with in Detroit, really solidified me as my number 1 pick. I can just imagine just watching the Lions over the past few weeks and how well they're doing, what he would do if he were in Detroit these days. I think he would absolutely rip up the league. He would make players of today, LaDainian Tomlinson and Adrian Peterson, and the list goes on, the star running backs today look mediocre. Just the way that he would cut on a dime, it almost looked to me like his leg would just snap. And I remember watching as a kid and just being in awe of this guy. Just go back and forth throughout the line, just looking for a hole. And once he hit it, he would just hit it hard, and he was gone. So for me, Barry Sanders is the number 1 player in all professional sports during my watching time that did not win a Super Bowl. So anyway, that's my list. I have a few honorable mentions. I'll shout out John Stockton, Mike Gartner, Dan Fouts, Barry Bonds, Anthony Munoz, Tony Gwynn, Eric Dickerson, Ryan Sandberg from my Cubbies, and Adam Oates. So there you have it. As I said, this is not a complete list. There are players that I feel deserved a championship in their time, but for me, just these were the top players. So feel free to add to this list in the comment section. Maybe there's someone I missed, or maybe you think that someone should be a little bit higher up or lower down. Feel free to comment on that. And if you want to read the full article, please head over to LastWordOnSports.com and check out the 2 articles. It's actually in a 2-part series, 10 to 6 and then 5 to 1. Thanks, guys, and have a good one.